All right. Well, welcome everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Paul Pangaro. I'm current president of the American Society for Cybernetics. We appreciate you coming today. I'm particularly excited by this. I've known Merve a little while, but appreciate very much her thoughtfulness and care and research. And she's unearthed many important facts about a project that's very important in the history and was very important to Gordon and Elizabeth Pask, who used to speak about it frequently. My goal is simply to invite you, if you are not already a member, to look into the American Society for Cybernetics. Have a look at our site. We'll give you the link again in the chat in a moment. Benefits of membership are many, mostly the community of our collective ideas and people. There's an email list that you could join if you have questions or if you wish to contribute to conversations about cybernetics. And of course, events like this, which we announce regularly. So my thanks to you for coming, and I'll turn it over to Dulmini.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Dulmini Perera, and I will be moderating the session today. And we will have three parts. So first, I will introduce Merve, and then she will do a short, not a short presentation, but like a full presentation. And then we will I will respond to it, and we will kind of see and discuss for about 10 minutes, and then we will open the conversation to the audience. So we hope that you will have a wonderful time today. Just to introduce Merve. So I met Merve at the ASC 60 conference. So it's been almost an year, and it's such a pleasure to see you present a different part of your research today. Merve Sahin is a PhD candidate in the Visual and Performing Arts program at the University of Texas at Dallas, and graduate fellow at the Edith O'Donnell Institute of Art History. She's currently writing her dissertation on systems in cybernetic art by examining the lifelong reflexive practice of three artists, Gordon Pask, Agnes Dennis, and Nina Sobel. Last June, Sahin presented the paper, The History of EEG Research in Cybernetics and Artists' Expression, Biological Feedback and Structural Coupling, at the 60th meeting of the American Society of Cybernetics. She has presented her research at the annual meetings of the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture and the Society for Literature, Science, and the Arts. And Sahin was awarded the prestigious Fulbright grant in 2018 to attend the San Francisco Art Institute, where she earned an MA in 2020 in art history. Her thesis, registered in the Leonardo Abstract Service, focused on the shift from paint into computation in the art practice of Harold Cohen during the 1960s and 70s. So over to you, Merve, and we're looking forward.
Thank you, Dulmini, for your kind introduction, and I'm very excited for our conversation afterwards. Let me present. Does this all work well?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for ASC and their invitation, especially Matthews and Howard, for organizing the event for me to talk about this project that I have been working on for the last almost 2 years. In today's talk, I will present my preliminary research for the first time on the project of installing Gordon Pask course assembly system in tutorial environments, in short form, CASTE, in a learning environment designed by Edwin Schlossberg at the Brooklyn Children's Museum in the 1970s. Pask describes this experimental system as an embodiment of his conversation theory and a model for theory of learning and cognition concerned with concepts and interaction. The project was unfortunately unrealized, but it exemplifies Pask's influence on a large set of disciplines: architecture, design, art, game theory, educational psychology, and machine intelligence. This case study on how CASTE function in the Children's Museum touches upon this variety. Brooklyn Children's Museum opened its door in 1899 after Professor William Goodyear, who was the curator of the fine arts at the Brooklyn Museum, proposed the establishment of the world's first children's museum. The first home of the institution was the Adam Newton House in Bedford, today known as Rover Park in Brooklyn. Throughout its 125 years of history, the museum has been carried into 4 different buildings. In 1968, Adam and Smith's houses were relocated to an empty warehouse with the name Muse, the Bedford Lincoln Neighborhood Museum. This move enabled the museum to operate its program for 9 years, where much of the work with Pask's nonprofit company System Research was carried out in relation to the design of the new building. This new building of the Brooklyn Children's Museum that CASTE was designed to be implemented, built by the architecture firm Hardy Holzman Pfeiffer Associates, which was composed of 3 principals, Hugh Hardy, Malcolm Holzman, and Norman Pfeiffer. The firm designed educational and art facilities such as the Salisbury School in Maryland, dance studio and music performance hall at St. Paul's School in New Hampshire, and or most notably Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum in New York City. Written by the architectural and urban critic Michael Sorkin, the book Hardy Holzman Pfeiffer provides an analysis and index of buildings designed by the firm. Sorkin simply puts a summary of how these architects created their design philosophy, a neo-functionalist tradition, functionalism with human face. Sorkin places the design elements of the firm into the revitalization of architectural style of functionalism in the 60s. The first wave of this movement was defined by Le Corbusier's pronouncement that a house is a machine for living, understood architecture similar to a mechanical object. The second wave, particularly inspired by the Archigram Group in England and Metabolist in Japan, left an impact on the Hardy Holzman Pfeiffer buildings in their integration with the aesthetics of industrial objects, according to Sorkin. Brooklyn Children's Museum from its inception was designed for youth to experience art where its totality could be sensed, touched, and lived. The museum's first curator-in-chief, Anna Billings-Gullop, defines the aim as, the child must feel that the whole plan is for him. He must feel that it was created for him, that in all of its plan it puts him first. At the turn of the mid-century, community leadership showed a great interest in the pedagogy of the youth. Such examples are the substantial involvement of American Association of Museum in the education sector, the 1916 proceeding of the National Endowment for the Arts, titled Relationship Between Museums and Schools, or the 1951 Conference of the Youth in Today's World. The common denominator of all these attempts was the rejection of a mere display of objects in white cube, and by instead emphasizing the interaction and learning within an aesthetic environment. The implementation of CASTE in the learning environment carried out this mission. And now I will briefly introduce individuals who involved in the project. American artist, poet, and cybernetician, Edwin Schlossberg, who rather exists in the peripheries of the history of cybernetics, designed the learning environment for Brooklyn Children's Museum in the 1970s. Author of many books and journal publications, Schlossberg was involved in the larger cybernetic network for decades, including close ties with the biological computer lab of Heinz von Foster and the design of the world game with Buckminster Fuller. Schlossberg from 1967 until 1974 was the founder and editor of Good News, the Journal of Environmental Design, that its advertisement was put in the fall 1968 issue of Fuller Catalog, including pieces by Fuller, von Foster, John Cage, Alvin Toffler, and John McHale. The journal encompassed various subjects of design problems in a similar aesthetic composition of the 70s, like the University and Fuller Catalog. Founding the ESI design firm in New York, Schlossberg specialized in the creation of interactive environments for museums and companies at large, along with producing many artworks. His works of art can be folded under the conceptual art and fluxus movements. He received his doctoral degree with a focus on science and literature from Columbia University. The pirated editions of his dissertation, Einstein and Beckett, a record of an imaginary discussion with Albert Einstein and Samuel Beckett, along with his book, How I Learned, was later published by Annetta Pedretti's Press, Princelet Editions in the 1970s. Gordon Pask, British cybernetician born in 1928, studied arts, theater, geology, biology, engineering, and psychology. His writings entailed approximately 250 publications, developing a seminal approach to system research and cybernetics. While he held various academic positions such as at Cornell University, University of Amsterdam, and the University of Illinois at UCL with Paul Foster, his primary professional location was System Research in Richmond, Surrey, England, which he co-founded in 1953 with his wife Elizabeth Paul Pask and Robin McKinnon-Wood under the name Sirelella. The company later received nonprofit status in 1961, becoming a hub for many influential researchers of the era. Pask's most condensed ideas about aesthetic and art can be found in his article, Comment, a Case Study, and a Plan. It appeared in the collection of texts from the curator Yossi Everhard exhibition, Cybernetics Serendipity, where Pask exhibited his famous artwork, Colloquy of Mobiles. My interpretation of this text is that for Pask, aesthetically potent environments are reactive, adaptive, and conversational in nature, and they are environments of learning and novelty seeking. By taking this account, CASTE at the Brooklyn Children's Museum is a striking example that illustrates Pask's occupation with aesthetics and architecture as a theory and practice, not only to be found in Musicolor, Colloquy of Mobiles, and Found Palace, but also in his teaching and learning devices such as electrochemical ear, Saki, Euclides, CASTE, and later ThoughtSticker. This creation of teaching machines and conversation theory was a result of decades of research conducted by many academics at System Research. To name a few of these contributors, Bernard Scott, here with us today, Dionysius Kalnikos, George Mallon, Jared Dazoo, Paul Pangoratier, Robin McKinnon-Wood, and Elizabeth Pask, which only be a limited list. Bernard Scott and Elizabeth Pask, who are on this list, particularly contributed to the museum project. Scott, as an educational psychologist, worked on the original conception of conversation theory and CASTE in the 1970s. He worked as a scientific co-coordinator between the museum and System Research. Receiving the Warren McCulloch Award of American Society for Cybernetics in 2013, Scott authored Explorations in Second-Order Cybernetics and Cybernetics for the Social Sciences, which were described as long-felt new books illustrating the framework of how cybernetics is relevant to social sciences. Last year, I had the opportunity to talk and interview Scott about this museum project. Elizabeth Paul Pask, being the director of System Research Ltd, had been an important collaborator of Pask both in the early days of the company and touring England with Musicolor. In the later years of the 60s and 70s, she conducted experiments with children, further developing CASTE in Brooklyn and England. A unique example of how Elizabeth Pask, Gordon Pask, and Schlossberg came together, along with the wider cybernetic group, can be seen in the meta book. This glossary was a complementary design to Cybernetic of Cybernetics and is a collection of knowledge map or conceptual entailment structures unique to author's entries inspired by Paskian framework. The first diagram in the book made by Pask is a systemic example of mapping terms in conversation theory. Elizabeth Pask created a map in the meta book demonstrating the relationship between conversations and interviews. Her diagram follows the first example by Pask next to Schlossberg's structure on the same page that again refers to the words, concept, and communication. An exchange between von Foster and Schlossberg revealed that Schlossberg and Pask already met before April 1972, while the occasion of their first interaction is still unclear. What led Schlossberg to land a staff position as the administrator of exhibition design at the museum was when he incidentally sat next to the museum director, Lloyd Hezekiah, who led the museum from 1964 until 1984 at a White House conference on children and youth in 1971. This position allowed Schlossberg to create learning environment that he describes as an experiment and research laboratory for children embedded within an aesthetic environment. CASTE projected to be installed at the South Environment Learning Laboratory, an area devoted to work in helping children learn to learn. Like Fun Palace, the museum project contained the spirit of indeterminacy, flexibility, and reflexivity in its adaptation, as much as all tasking devices are indeterminate and fluxus. Per Paul Pongora's description, Pask's machines were often cannibalized for newer incarnations. The learning environment was successfully created, and even after the demolition of the building, some components of it are still preserved today, while the machine version of CASTE was never installed in the museum. CASTE, however, was successfully created and worked in England, where it was tested with students between the ages of 18 and 25. The museum project was mainly designed for the ages between 8 and 12. The device was made up of 3 panels in its existence at System Research, where the activity involves the experimenter, student, and machine. The first panel served as a communication console, allowing students to express which topics relation that they were interested in exploring through the interactive and graphical use of entailment structures. The learner can choose a head topic and work towards understanding what the topic entails by forming relations. The second panel functioned as statistical modeling facility, StatLab, enabling the system to gather demonstrations and explanations. The third panel, called the Belief and Opinion Sampling System, BOSS, was used to assess students' level of uncertainty about a topic by analyzing their problem-solving abilities. A significant portion of efforts between Brooklyn Children's Museum and System Research went towards creating the task and entailment structures to aid children's learning under the unifying themes of physical laws, principles of organization, and self as both biological and social system. While one can find more encompassing and proper definitions of task and entailment structures, along with matches among past publications in the 70s and 80s, my explanation will be restricted on how it was presented in the context of Brooklyn Children's Museum. In the document, Notes on Entailment and Task Structure Generation, Scott created the guideline for the staff of the museum, teaching the topics for the age groups from 3 to 10 years old. Scott explains that creating both task and entailment structures are highly interrelated, that the particular topic is made precise by specifying the task structure. One begins by breaking down and concretely defining each part of a level 0 descriptions. For example, solving a problem. Then one abstracts and draws distinctions. Here, Scott provides the diagram of how knowing A entails knowing B and C. In the structure, the distinct nodes of A, B, and C represent topics. The arches represent entailment. Task structures, Scott explained, can be represented as flowcharts consisting of a series of permissions and commands to do with sets of instruction. Entailment structures, on the other hand, are less about solving a problem and doing an action, and more about how one constructs relations. Scott tells in the document analogies between topics involves a cycle of entailments that are analyzed as A is to B, as C is to D, explaining the relations to be known. The way that I understand description with an easy example could be spade is to dig as knife is to cut. The goal here is to figure out the relationship between spade and dig, namely the function of object as only one example of a relationship among many, and apply this known relation to knife to just cutting. A student exploring the entailment and task structures can create various relationships between topics in the guided system of CASTE in the resemblance of a tree structure rather than a straight line. As the title of CASTE suggests, this is a course and tutorial environment of learning that does the job of world building that I find similarity with solving a puzzle game of a topic relationship to understand the world so that I can act on it. This argument can be supported by the accompanying poem, A Sketch of the Worldview, where Scott implements certain vocabularies from it in the entailment structure diagram as seen on the screen. Reading a small segment of this wonderful poem that's integrated into the engine entailment structure. Here's a space, now is the time. Here, there, as places are stuff. Changes of stuff and space through time have brought me here. Changes of stuff and space through time may take me here and there. Changing in stuff is needed if change is to occur. Ending the poem, observe the world, you're uncertain. Observe yourself, you're uncertain. What's going to happen? Observe yourself, observing yourself, and observing the world, and you will understand. The idea of world building based on the second order approach to observation was integrated into the layout of the museum, designed as learning the environment by examining the transformation of matter within physical reality. The initial solidification of exhibition design for a museum was authored by Schlossberg separately in April and September 1972. Both documents were enthusiastically sent to one poster. Schlossberg clearly manifested the goal of the design, saying, the museum environment thus becomes an experimental laboratory of basic structural patterns in physical reality, with the children's varying sensory-motor abilities considered as the design access criteria. The learning environment was divided into 4 basic Greek subsystems, namely earth, air, fire, and water, which Schlossberg argued were the components of reality and modes of existence transformed into one another. The design is a pathway following a stream bed with water undergoing various changes. This total environment is a simulation of living systems embedded in the metaphor and blueprint modeled after an integrated forest, which is later explored symbolically in a computer-assisted area to teach the logics and metaphysics of such subsystems. There were at least 65 small and large components that Schlossberg's initial design contained. The entrance was a recycled trolley kiosk from 59th Street Bridge Palace, which welcomes the visitors. The inside contained a fisheye lens map of New York, centralizing the museum. After entering the kiosk, the people tube continued underground, which the installation area was beneath the surface. This tube with a water stream was lit by neon helix lights, informing the levels of 180 feet, approximately 55 meters of descent. Access through the manifold surface exploration area, the stream is divided into 4 areas of exploration. In the first break opening to the left, children workshop an ecological news bulletin board sharing information about wind, tides, weather, seasonal pollution, or the times of flowers bloom. On the right side, a self-identification area includes fiber optic props that amplifies the images of children's mouths and ears for them to discover the operation of complex body parts, accompanied by an area where they can trace themselves on paper in relation to other objects. The adaptation room was designed for children who have just learned to walk while exposing them to various experiences of textures and form shapes. The second stream break leads to a ripple tank, which demonstrates the wave phenomena of particles physics, hung from the ceiling along with the refrigeration unit to show how crystals are created. A light projector is composed of lenses, prisms, filters, gratings, and mirrors for children to understand light resources with a puppet stage. On the right side of the second stream break, transformations of stream energy are used for a printing press that teaches woodcut lithography. The display of robots here configures different movements, along with a mobile pottery wheel crafting different forms. The third stream break mostly utilizes the wind power through its additional effect on music. Air pumps demonstrate various effects of pressure. Solar cell panels teach the generation of electricity by powering a small lamp along with a wind generator, which produces sounds from the organ pipes. A computer terminal for music is particularly interesting as it shows children how they can make electronic music by using percussion instruments. A fish tank enables children to crawl around, allows them to differentiate between hydrodynamic and aerodynamic systems and their working mechanisms. The final stream leads the visitors to a pond that is placed in the interior of a semi-tropical greenhouse, supporting the living requirements of small animals and plants. A demountable wooden igloo was placed for children to take apart and rebuild. In a seedling area that you see, the various stages of plant growth are demonstrated by teaching the care of plants through workshops. The minimal surface structure at the end led the visitors into courtyard forest containing the native plants of Brooklyn. In this map, CASTE was planned to be installed in the Self and Environment Learning Laboratory to create conversations around learning to learn, and to build worldview in a collaborative game-like situation between researchers, educators, parents, and children. CASTE in the learning environment functioned as the nervous system of the museum that mapped out the conceptual relationships emerging from the physical environment. CASTE was not a description or diorama where children sit in front of a display and absorb information. Instead, the system allowed children to observe themselves learning based on CASTE's conversation theory. Conversation theory that CASTE embodies is a methodology that examines concept forming and concept sharing by measuring externalized conversations between participants. Published in the 1972 paper, CASTE, a system for exhibiting learning strategies and regulating uncertainties, Pask and Scott created a conversational skeleton, illustrating that participant A is a human learner or a respondent separated by an interface from participant B, who could be a human teacher or a heuristic device. A and B are classes of intentions that are characterized by repertoires or procedures that are, according to Pask, include both serial and non-deterministic programs. A concept is a procedure for bringing about a relation. Participants give each other in the form of utterances and speech acts. These descriptions are distinguished at two levels. Level 0, do something or solve a problem, and level 1, reconstruct a process or learn to solve a problem containing topic relations. Participant A explains how they construct and reconstruct, meaning self-reproduce, to stabilize a relationship between concepts, which constitutes memory. The teach-back condition was assessed by Pask and Scott in 1972 paper, Learning Strategies and Individual Competence, that the students demonstrate understanding by providing a matching definition of topic relations through self-reproduction of concepts and performing the ways to achieve a goal or solve a problem. In the 1966 paper, Man, Machines, and Control of Learning, Pask says, the acting of teaching appears in the cybernetic framework as the control of learning. This control, in my understanding of Pask work, is also measurement of learning by adaptively correcting the mistakes students make, and this can also be traced in the early adaptive teaching devices of Pask. Self-adaptive keyboard instructor, Saki, for example, materialize a learning system based on training the machine with corrections of problems user encountered and probabilistic estimation of error responses, instead of organizing the system in a sequence of items. Pask describes this in his book, An Approach to Cybernetics, where in a larger context, he examines the Markovian and non-Markovian processes, which are about the probability of event occurring at the present time depending on its past states, also known as non-stationary behaviors. In his article, The Cybernetics of Gordon Pask, Scott examines the earlier adaptive teaching devices by Pask, such as Saki and Gretes, operating with the assumption that students perform the skill in question correctly and consistently once the learning occurred. This assumption was later challenged, according to Scott, in a 1968 study conducted by Pask and Brian Lewis. the study of a null point method to study the acquisition of simple and complex transformation skills to use. The authors observed some learners take control of their learning by making intentional mistakes. In a 1971 paper written by Pask and Scott, Learning and Teaching Strategies in the Transformation of Skill, the authors conceived the notion of free learning strategies by investigating the learning styles of students. They identified two main strategies: a holistic approach, where the student tackled many elements at once, and a serialist approach, where the student progressed step by step. Based on these studies spanning from the 60s at System Research, a conversational teaching system was created and adapted in the Brooklyn Children's Museum project. In the system with CASTE, the student participants could make their choices only if their performance met a certain standard. If not, the teaching system took over and controlled the learning process by using proven diagnostic methods to accomplish learning. This hybrid approach, letting students to free learn while achieving basic knowledge tests by the machine, was found to be more effective than either pure free learning or adaptive teaching machines alone. Pask's inquiry in conversation theory was to develop a framework for generalized intelligence, which is neither computational nor biological. To set this agenda, Pask makes the statement in the introduction of the book, Conversation, Cognition, and Learning, vernacularly also known as the Green Book, saying that the theory's scope is extended by an underlying contention that cognitive processes involving actual or potential awareness are not confined to human brain. Though brains, human or animal, are often associated with cognitive operations, neither biological fabric nor any other kind of fabric is responsible, except in incidental way, for the peculiar nature of cognition. For Pask, studying the physical object in which cognition occurs does not necessarily inform us about the nature of cognition. Instead of categorizing cognition based on the distinction of organic or inorganic or human or non-human, Pask proposed individuation and made the distinction between psychological T individuals and mechanical M individuals. T individuals are organizations that are cognitive and made up of self-reproducing memories. Pask characterized T individuals in Nicholas Negroponte's book, Soft Architecture Machines chapter, where he says, typical P individuals are people regarded as personalities, characters in play, executed by any actors, the performance of stable roles in society, and the organization of coherent groups, factions, governments, cultures, and persisting ideas. They are conversational processes and might as well be participants in a conversation with themselves and other organizations. M individuals, on the other hand, are physical structures, more accurately organizations, functioning similarly to mechanical or biological processors, which execute the conversational processes of P individuals. Aspects of machine intelligence in soft architecture machines laid out the fundamental tenets of conversation theory, including M and P individuation, conversational skeleton, and CASTE, around the same time of Brooklyn Children's Museum. The original 1972 title of the same text was Artificial Intelligence, a Preference or a Theory. The collection of essays in the book examined artificial or machine intelligence in relationship with architecture. Additionally, in the 1969 paper, The Architectural Relevance of Cybernetics, Pask find that the urban development can be modeled as a self-organizing system, and cybernetics also holds some explanatory value, as it enables artificial intelligence programs to replicate certain features of architectural design. Negroponte's goal in the book was similar. Architectural machines, cast as an example, was about understanding, in Negroponte's words, the makings of intelligence and the makings of architecture. Architect and machine here are understood to have a symbiotic relationship. In the 1969 paper again, Pask ends the article with the argument that relationship between controller and controlled entity remains intact when terms of designer and system being designed or systemic environment and inhabitants, or urban plan and city are used instead. However, there's a nuance for Pask. The designer is essentially shaping the systems of control, meaning that design itself becomes a form of control and control. In this way, the designer performs a similar role to the system they are creating, but at a higher level within organizational hierarchy. This aspect of architectural and urban design is also important for Schlossberg, based on his work on operations and management of ecological resources by employing a systemic approach preceding the Brooklyn project. One significant collaboration Schlossberg did was the creation of World Game with Fuller and Daniel Gildesheim in 1961. The group used Fuller projection, the Dymaxion map created in 1943. The World Game, also known as the World Peace Game, was an educational simulation conducted in a classroom environment with 26 people from the ages of 19 to 46 years old. It was an alternative to classical war games by centralizing peace, cooperation, and sustainability to solve global challenges, focusing on the preservation of environment, cultural heritage, living standards, population, and equal distribution of Earth's limited resources without anyone gaining profit at the expense of one another. During the creation phase of learning environment in Brooklyn, Schlossberg also inquired whether the room can be designed for children to work together. But the interviews and work with children reveal that children show minimal or no interest in others, even if they are already acquainted. This aspect of collaborative game environment in the museum, like the World Game, therefore, was difficult to address. I believe, however, there's an argument to be made about the similarities between two projects. The conversational model that CASTE provided was a form of world building for game-like situations that the future of learning environment contained possibility of collaborative games between children. Returning to the research notes by Scott, what follows the sketch of the worldview poem is a list including the fields of studies that worldview is composed of, such as technology, biology, sociology, art, cybernetics, and economy. Scott ends the report with a note saying, though I reflect a worldview, it's natural with respect to values, politics, propaganda, mysticism, good and evil, except that it asserts that there's only one game, which we play more or less effectively, that of reflectively creating roles to satisfy our wants. The game component of learning environment and CASTE is, I think, quite particular, as both Pask and Schlossberg, after the project, wrote game books. In 1976-75, Schlossberg and John Brockman authored the Pocket Calculator game book. It includes culmination of cooperative plays that were designed to be played with a four-pocket calculator, based on card games, life situations, governments, and economy, and familiar board games. And the book required a Urubai, co-author of the paper Autopoiesis, the Organization of Living Systems, its characterization and model with Maturana and Varela, created 5 games for the game book. One was the game Cold War, where each player takes on the role of a nuclear nation, such as United States, USSR, and others, in which each turn symbolizes 1 year in global history, beginning from the present days. 2 years later, Schlossberg also authored a pocket calculator game book geared towards children. While more humorous in its prose, Pask, together with Ronald Glanville and Mike Robinson, also authored a collaborative game book, Calculator Saturnalia, or Travels with a Calculator, in 1981. A collection of games that can be played with a simple calculator, accompanied by amusing travel stories. The book starts with how Glanville, Robinson, and Pask are commissioned by the fictional character Thomas Dolby, whose company, Wonka's Calculator Factory in Kalamazoo, Chicago, sent a trio for a traveling research project in the hopes of marketing the metaphorical calculator, Eureka. This imaginary device is easily dispensable by thumb screws and well fit into a pocket. The games involve calculations on housing, armies, mental maps, or economy. While there is no archival correspondence that I found provides a link of discussion between these game books with the projects of world game, learning environment, and self-organizational aspect of design and architecture, their contents clearly suggest a network of ideas in multiple platforms. So what happened to the museum project with CASTE, leading to its end? The first contract between System Research and Brooklyn Children's Museum was made in June 1973. The initial 2 payments of $4,000, which today equals approximately $30,000, were made to System Research. Shortly after, in September 1973, the first contract was terminated by the museum on the basis that both institutions cannot provide CASTE necessary personnel to carry out the work while continuing to be supportive of the project. During this period, Mindy Kirchner, who was also an editor of the Green Book, was employed in England and traveled to Brooklyn. Her letter, dated around the month of August 1973, communicates some of the problems that emerged. During the orientation, for example, the museum staff voiced their emotional and intellectual reactions faced with CASTE that there was a certain apathy towards time spent learning this highly complex framework while moving the museum into a new building. Kirchner also mentions her dire financial situation as the second payment was withheld that prevented people, in her words, to function with the excitement and love which I really feel this project deserves. In a letter dated September 26, 1973, Elizabeth Pask and Bernard Scott expressed disappointment over the termination of the CASTE project and outlined the significant research and design work that's already being completed. It's important to mention that the fundamental paper publications related to conversation theory and CASTE were concurrent with the developments in Brooklyn, often days and months apart. And any new development within System Research been continuously included in the design of the project. A draft of budget for a new contract started to be prepared in January 1974, and a new contract was signed at the end of March the same year. In between the termination of the first contract and initiation of the second, Elizabeth Pask, among many personnel between the two institutions, traveled to New York, and the assistant director of the museum, Gabrielle Pohl, visited System Research in England. The project was far from being over, and various interviews and experiments by System Research were carried out at Henley Grammar School in England. During the second initiation of the contract, work towards installation of computerized CASTE was undertaken, but that did not happen. In a letter from Pohl to Museum Director Lloyd Hezekiah, Pohl asked for a larger budget, up to $30,000, for the computer to be installed in 1976. In the same letter, Pohl acknowledges the experimental and ambiguous nature of the project, saying, "It's understandable, however, that such a miscalculation took place, since this project was never being actualized, and there are indeed so many unknowns in a venture of this sort. We are experimenters, if you will." After Pohl's letter, a new contract with a budget of $14,260, approximately $100,000 today, was made in September 1974. Between April and December of 1974, more serious work was conducted in terms of envisioning the machine in the museum and carried out fieldwork studies with children in New York. The youth in 4 schools were selected by their class teachers and were included in the interviews. The children came from racially and economically diverse backgrounds from African American, Caribbean, Chinese American, European American, and Puerto Rican communities, along with the inclusion of disabilities and giftedness. They examined the general concepts of energy conservation, pressure, and condensation that provided a detailed analysis of the vocabulary used by children to describe the workings of the steam engine. In the document, the interviews recorded unique behaviors of children. Some couples will become the dominant talkers, while others resisted saying anything at all. Children got distracted by things such as fire alarms, videos, or noise, depending on the time of the interviews. Some needed pep talks from their principals. While there is no archival evidence found in the research, there is an evidence that these experiments were recorded on audio and visual tapes. The resolution of CASTE project within the museum happened in January 1975. Diane Diaz, who is a living African-American artist, became an important contributor to the project. In the early 1974, she visited and stayed with Pask's family and worked towards adapting CASTE into 3 domains in the museum: physical principles, anthropology, and reading. She authored an extensive report on marking the end of the project titled The CASTE Project, Review and Recommendations. In her report, she expressed a similar issue that while CASTE was proven to be valuable, especially training the museum personnel on up-to-date conceptual orientation and theories of learning, the design of the machine did not fit well with the original scope of the learning environment. She iterated the fact that, given the experimental nature of the project, trial and error were in the fabric of their collective experience with CASTE. The motto of learning to learn at the end became an integral part of the museum's mission. While the museum carried out its mission continuing today, CASTE, conversation theory, and system research followed their own destiny. Around 1978, the company struggled financially to stay alive and closed in the early 1980s. Pask went on to teach at Concordia University and University of Amsterdam. In the book Micromen, Living and Growing with Computers, written by Pask and Susan Curran, the author says the following. In system research, we started out with the idea of a knowledge map, accessible from many points. It turned out that this approach, though less restricted than the linear model of a classroom lecture or a textbook, was still restrictive. Given this much liberty, people wanted more, and gained by having more. The computer had to be programmed so that their knowledge maps evolved. This also proved to be too restrictive. So the calculus of proto-logic LP was programmed. In the 1984 paper, Review of Conversation Theory and Proto-Logic or Proto-Language LP, Pask provides the definitions and contextual development of LP. It started out as a companion to conversation theory. Around this time, with Paul Pangara, the TOTS ecosystem was built in relation to this data development. The last version of conversation theory was conceived when Pask was a professor at the University of Amsterdam and collaborated with the Dutch scientist George de Zoo. Together, they conceived the interaction of actors theory. The first time I came across the mention of Brooklyn Children's Museum and Pask's involvement was when I visited Pask's archive at the University of Vienna in December 2023, a research trip funded by my dissertation fellowship grant at the Edith O'Donnell Institute of Art History. The Vienna archive only contains a very limited number of materials and correspondences to the project. Last year in December, I visited the archive of the Brooklyn Children's Museum, where I found the most extensive documentation about the project. Heinz von Fulzer Archive at the University of Illinois helped me in finding the publications and correspondences between Schlossberg and von Fulzer. I'm sincerely grateful for all the people who have given me their time, guidance, and support for this project. Marcus Carney from Vienna, Kiani Kodama from Brooklyn, Kathleen Corsila from Illinois, Paul Pangaro, Bernard Scott, and my doctoral advisor, Krista Terranova. So thank you.
Woo!
Hey, yes.
Thank you so much, Merve.
Yeah.
So I guess we will open up the conversation. So I would like to probably comment on a few points and kind of reflect a little bit on certain things that you said, perhaps 2 points. Yeah. And then we will open up the conversation, which means I think anyone who has questions, you could also post the questions on the chat, or you could also ask Merve directly. So yes. I've met Merve and then kind of talked about this a bit, and there were a few things that came to my mind. I also listening to you today, seeing this fascinating PowerPoint and the kind of story and case study that you present, also bring into light Pask, but also Edwin Schlossberg. This is the first time I'm actually listening to some of his work presented in this detail. So one thing that came to my mind, even with the kind of topic that you suggest, is this idea of learning. And so I come from a background of architecture, and I've looked at the encounters between cybernetics and design. And your kind of discussion prompted me to think about some archival material that I've looked at in the past. So I hope you can see my. And I think one interesting thing in this kind of thread that you draw about and talk about in terms of learning is to kind of position Pask within the broader discussions about learning at that point in time. And so this is an image, and this comes from the Heinz von Forester archive. And I think there's a very interesting link here between the broader cultural project that was underway at the moment. And this is from this SIDOC kind of workshop, where actually von Forester, Gordon Pask, Humberto Maturana, Herbert Brun, all came together. And I'm sure that this, this audience might be quite familiar with different parts of this conversation. And I think one thing that they were trying to address was the trivialization of society, and how society was getting trapped in this kind of vicious loops due to a standardization of knowledge. So this whole idea of learning and the learning environment was an important way for them to kind of help society kind of break away from it. You can see this was a transdisciplinary, but also transglobal network. So I think my first reflection of kind of point that I wanted to ask you was, what are your thoughts about learning? And you talk about, intelligence and all those things. Is there anything special that you want to kind of also add to that? Any reflection?
Yeah, let me think how to start this. So I think that this network of people, Pask, Maturana, Verla, Heinz von Foster, was quite involved, and these ideas really came together by being influencing each other. Because I didn't really get to talk about this in the presentation, but Pask conception of T individuals are autopoietic. And he, in one of the articles, he does refers to co-ontogeny. So kind of like conversations of co-ontogeny between organisms. So there's actually quite a collaborative approach to the self-organization and play between each other. And in a way that I think Pask time that he spent at DCL was quite important in the early 60s to influence what you have referred in terms of this large network of people. And in that regard, I think it's very interesting that like conversations in that sense, and I mean, intelligence is kind of a difficult word to elaborate on this one, but I want to stick to the term conversation here. Is that it's both. It's not really limited to biology or computer, but it was something more that governed that idea of self-organization. Yeah.
Yes, I think that was the most kind of, I think, an interesting aspect of what you presented. And I think there was one more point that struck me, which is this, I mean, in your presentation, you mentioned like a very famous quote, at least in architecture, this idea of Le Corbusier talking about the house as a machine, right? It's a kind of to show a certain kind of functionalism, which equated into a different idea of mechanization, right? And so the machine became also a term to understand how processes became mechanized. And I think one very interesting thing that you show in your presentation, in the way in which kind of Pask and Schlossberg kind of start to approach the learning environment, is that the environment becomes something that is mutually kind of changing, responsive, right? So it's of that not being, moving from that functionalism to kind of show how they kind of evolve and kind of mutually react to each other. So, and that environment, I think, in past work sometimes becomes a space, but sometimes a tool, like, the computer, but it could be so many things. And I think you show that, and you kind of mentioned that very interestingly. And with that, I think that was another important aspect of research that you mentioned it comes in this kind of last book that you showed on Microman, and the idea, how do we respond to a growing environment? And it's like, when children, and what is it that play teaches us? And I think this is where I think, for me at least, Pask becomes really important, because the Paskin machines and Paskin environments, I think they do teach people to understand, contingency, respond to, or it's like the learning of learning is a kind of training to deal with uncertainty, contingency. And you mentioned this, with the underdeveloped goals, etc. And I find it kind of, fascinating. So I wonder if you have any more thoughts on that aspect, or if you see that in this learning environment that you've been studying.
So, what do you ask? Like, what would be the sort of this aspect of contingency in learning in the environment that
affected? Yes.
Yeah. So the first thing you said was that the functionalism, the lockers, and because Pask also refers to that quote in the architectural relevance of cybernetics. I mean, the reason. So I first want to refer to what you said about that is I couldn't really find any relationship between the architecture firm and Pask. While there's like really a lot of similarities in between the two idea, because Pask refers to functionalism as architectural styles a lot in the architectures of cybernetics, but relevance of cybernetics. But there was really not a correspondence that I found that draws similarities between the two. I was hoping so, finding one, but it didn't happen. And in terms of contingency and learning, I think one way of approaching to that question might be what I have described in terms of error responses, that the Saki and later CASTE was somehow was doing this error connection in there, but at the same time it's allowed to make mistakes as well. So it's kind of integrated the two systems, the two ways together. So you're able to make mistakes intentionally, and then you get to be corrected at the same time. And I think it's something that is that's very much biological as well. That's more than more than it meets the eye, because your parents are your first teacher, and your parents actually correct you on your mistakes, but at the same time they allow you to make mistakes. And so it's a thing that actually happens, not in terms of this mechanized thing, but at the same time it's very biological. I mean, even animals, like we have a lot of cats in our house in Turkey, and they do correct their little babies. So in that sense, I think that might be one way of thinking about contingency, that learning is not a necessary thing where you consistently perform the correct form. And I think it will be also, like, this sort of approach would also be something that does not align well with the larger occupation of teleology in cybernetics as well, because it's always this continuous circle loop of feedback that is contingent and not a necessary relationship. So I think, like, this idea of how you make mistakes, but at the same time you get to be corrected, not through conditioning, like not through punishment and reinforcements, that is the classical behavior conditional approach, but instead you get to do free learn and get to be corrected through the diagnostic measures by the machine is actually does give you a sense of contingency of learning here. Yeah, so I hope that's
wonderful. So I guess we have a lot of people who've known Pask, who might know this case study, who might have a lot of questions. So we're going to open up. responses, any comments?
I'm willing to defer to questions from others. And I appreciate so much the scope of what you're trying to do here, Merve. It's extraordinary, and I think you've done it wonderfully and comprehensively. There's under each slide, there is so much to reveal and so much detail to go into. I'm tempted to put some people on the spot to make commentary. Bern, I don't know whether you have any comments. You were there, and not to ask you for a critique of all the work that you've heard, and I know you've been in discussions with Merve. Bern, you're on mute. We need to ask you to unmute first. But I would love some comments from you.
Well, thank you, Merve. I thought it was wonderful. It was nicely thorough and comprehensive. A couple of virtues for a researcher, a born researcher. I had a visit to the doctor a couple of days ago, 3 days ago, and he confirmed that I need to have my ears syringed. So I was having a bit of a struggle hearing everything clearly. So I hope there'll be some what your talk will be made available in some future form, so that I can hopefully catch up when my hearing's working. But
yeah.
no. As I say, I'm very impressed by how thorough you've been and how comprehensive you've been with respect to that particular project. It was a very important project at the time, and it was very disappointing, certainly for System Research, when it didn't proceed. Something else I was going to say. Oh, and I was given quite a lot of responsibility to keep the museum people on side, and you did mention that we had a visit in England from Gabriella Paul, in which she acted as a subject using the CASTE system. So she had a first-hand experience of what it was like to be taken through a CASTE tutorial. Very good. That time in the life of System Research, things were bubbling. We'd done, Pask and I in particular had done well with getting funding for our research on learning, and Pask was becoming more and more famous for his work, if you like, and he did a lot of business trips. He went to conferences, and he visited other institutions and so on. And he was very busy, because he was always busy. He was always writing something, doing something. But it was a very particular time, and I think that's why I was trusted to maintain the project as best I could, while he was busy doing other things. So I look back on those times with a lot of fondness, because I met some lovely people, and it was a nice vision of what might be, and it still is a nice vision of what could be in the future somewhere else. Okay, so again, thank you very much, Merve.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Bernard and I met, I think 4 or 5 times together, and he he taught me a lot about conversation theory, and it was one of the wonderful part of it was it was kind of like the conversation theory itself, the conversations that we held. So it was we kind of did the a little passing mode of conversations ourselves, and it was really wonderful to experience that.
We were living it, Merv, weren't
yeah. So yeah, in that regard, it was wonderful, and thank you so much, Bernard, for spending time with me and guiding me into the parts of this research that was quite difficult for me to figure out by myself.
My pleasure. I hope this isn't the end of our conversation, Merv.
No, you cannot get rid of me that easily. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So
That's it from me.
thank you so much. We do have a question from Germa. I hope I'm saying that properly. Merve, you can see this also on screen. Should I?
Yeah, since we are living in the era of the T in famous letters, I ask, is there supposedly a relationship between world vectors and machine learning? Male, female, king and queen, and Pask analogy of word relationships. Yeah, thank you for this question. I hope I understood it correctly, and I will kind of pick the words of male and female, king and queen here, because Pask does refer a lot about Turing machine, and the paper that talk about that Turing imitation game was actually starts with a male and a female, and they try to trick the other person who is male and who is female. So and then the game turns itself into human and machine. And considering the fact that colloquy of mobiles were also designed as male and female, I think there's more to this discussion that maybe I'm not really ready to answer right now, but I think it's on track or something. And Pask himself also encouraged the people in few instances, and I don't think Pask does this very often, in case it's not necessary, is to compare his conversation theory and Turing's imitation game. So I think there's a relationship in between. I'm unsure what is exactly the relationship or what will be the explanation of it properly, but he does refer to this contradiction in between the two, and I think there's more to that that Pask also wants people to reply to. Yeah, I hope I understood the question.
Merv, it's Bernard again.
Yeah.
Apologies, but I have something cooking.
Yeah.
I must go and rescue it before it burns out something. I can hear, but I'm going into the kitchen now.
Okay. Okay, Bernard. Thank you for letting us know. I mean, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So we have, I think, Mark.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah.
We have Mark Benslin, who is also posing a question. Mark, you can go ahead and.
Thank you. Yeah. I remember the few meetings that I had with Gordon Pask and some of the discussions. And I think there was another children's museum that Paul was involved in Washington, D.C. And now when you're presenting, I'm thinking about in our society where mechanism is so at this certain stage of development, what was the attraction of the mechanism? It seemed kind of like the creation of the mechanism was a focus of the interest, but also maybe an obstacle and maybe a beneficial obstacle. And we talk about the CASTE system not being realized at the museum as if that were a failure. And I wonder, and it's, if I understood correctly, you said that it's still influential to the museum, the discussion. And so maybe there's some aspect of it that it's a catalyst. And then a couple other things I want to connect to this is the framework of learning as being this social value, and therefore it's something we can raise money for, and it's something good to take part in. And I wonder if the fact that the main focus was learning maybe was problematic, and if learning had been something along with some other purposes, that might have, taken a different pathway. And then I just want to point out the playfulness of Pask's idea of the P individual, especially with the previous question about it's not boring. It's intriguing.
Yeah, to kind of start from the maybe from the last question is I think, yes, that the P individuals have this playfulness, and considering the fact that CASTE was actually one way of imagining Negroponte's architectural machine, that I think does an interesting job there, because I especially find it very interesting in his description of P individuals there as governments, as that you're an actor and you play these P individuals. You kind of isolate parts of certain things, and then you're now a P individual in a play. Is I think very interesting, and it in that sense it does create an unusual approach to game, to play. In a sense, and in a way, this idea was really you don't really see this as conversation theory itself, but in the early 60s, when he was when Pask was at BCL, some of his papers on self-organizing systems also talk about this competition and cooperation between entities. He doesn't refer to them as P individual back in the early 60s, but some sort of idea of developing a game, sort of predictive model to identify these self-organizing systems. So I think in that sense, learning is very fundamental to that world building. That you kind of learn learn the world, because it's a tutorial environment. You kind of tutorial yourself to the world like a game. When you play a game, you kind of learn how to play the game, and it gives you the rules and locations and everything you need to know about the thing, so that you act on it. And not just you, but you also act on it with other people based on the environment that you have learned. And I think this is kind of a consistent thing that comes up, that I see in Pask's work. So in terms of failure, I think the part of the reason that this project wasn't really written about, so there is only one. If you Google search this, which I have done since December 2023, the only two things comes up is Bernard Stott mentions this project in one paper of him, and then the New York Times article that comes up in Times Machine. And I learned it in Vienna with Marcus here, that we were kind of looking at it, and I was like, I'm really curious what happened to this. And Vienna doesn't actually have quite a lot, and at some point I gave up on that because I couldn't really find more information. But then Brooklyn Children's Museum, I found out, and I reached out to them after many attempts. I think in that kind of that the machine was not installed in the museum kind of contributed to the fact that it hasn't been written about before, and maybe somehow seen as failure. But if you really look at it through the lens of games and entailment structures and what it actually taught to the museum, itself as this research laboratory. So this is a laboratory approach to arts as a general thing. And this is not like this laboratory approach to arts is not really limited to Pask. It actually is quite widespread around this time period. So I think in that sense, it needs to be taught in terms of this larger or historical movement of sort of research laboratory approach to art making. And if you kind of think about it in terms of this experimental nature of the project, then you kind of start seeing the value of it and how it contributed to the museum mission that I have started to talk about in the very beginning, that the early 20th century approach to youth museums, which is really different than this white cube and institutional art that was prominent, and it kind of comes under the criticism to that movement with performances, happenings, earthworks, art and technology. And in terms of your first question on mechanization, like I think you can kind of think about mind-embodied dualism in terms of the mechanization, but the problem there is mostly the problem of substance, that we know the substance of the body and this computer that I have in front of me, but then we don't really know the substance of the mind. But then with the P and M individual, this kind of problem, I think that problem comes up in various ways, and I don't think it's something solvable. But the differences between P and M individual process and processes becomes interesting, because then he kind of takes the problem back to the problem of observation, not the substance problem, but the problem becomes the problem of observation instead of problem of substance. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yes, I hope that was helpful, Mark. I'll point out to two more questions, Merve, which is on the chat.
Yeah.
Did I understand correctly that the version of the entire BCL shown here was demolished, or did I mishear? Or perhaps more broadly, what has happened to the BCL since this? This is from Brett Neese.
I think I saw the question. I cannot see it again. Yes. Oh, okay. Correctly, that the version of the entire BCL. So there's no BCL, Brooklyn Children's Museum. So BCM, I think the thing is BCM versus BCM. So yeah, the third building that I have shown is the Holzman Pfeiffer Association. The architecture firm building was demolished again. And then the fourth building is the new building that is it's the yellow facade. So the museum that I talk about is an undergrad museum that's later again demolished in the fourth version of the museum. But then certain components of helix neon top tubes are still preserved, and you can go and see. It's part of it. So the museum's still going on, and you can kind of go and see some components of it today. It's still preserved a little bit, but the CASTE was never really used, but the entailment and task structures were implemented into the larger sense of the thing.
Yes, and then Brett says that it was PM that he was interested in, because the BCL was at the University of Illinois, Chicago. So now we move on to Mark. Has a very interesting question. I think I'll read it out. You can also see it on the chat. Thinking of games as a subset of play, I wonder if architecture and music and design, all of which draw on play, could be means to explore aspects of conversation there and complex systems, and of course how that could be worked into interactive installations. So
yeah, I think it's the collaborative games could be the answer to that question, but in that sense it actually gets a different approach to play, what it means to be playing, and maybe it's a new cybernetic definition of play that is not really commodified play, but instead of how organisms, human, non-human, biological, non-biological, like self-reproducing autonoma could also play. And I think in that sense, there's a lot to explore of that aspects of conversation and complex systems as your question. And in that sense, architecture and like this collaborative conversation theme comes up for us. I don't really have an answer to what it is today, how to do that. I think maybe we can think of cybernetics as this mode of existence that comes and goes, instead of defining it as a field like a physics or philosophy, but instead maybe a mode of thinking. Yeah.
Mark, do you want to add to that? Do you have?
Yeah.
He says collaborative games is an interesting frame.
No, that's right the direction I was actually thinking of and hoping to go. I mean, this whole talk has me really eager to explore a number of things. Schlossberg sort of had fallen off my radar. And a lot of what in a year from now, I'm working on preparing with some collaborators a presentation about what people learn from games. And I've also been looking at play as the broader framework for that. So this is getting me to think about how could conversation theory, and for that matter, cybernetics, be considered a distinctive form of play.
Yeah, I think so too. Maybe we should play the calculators Saturnalia together.
Yeah. Also the World Game and Fuller and all of that, which and Eleanor Ostrom's work on the, what is it called? Common Shared Resources. All of that, she created an institute in Indiana, which was working with games as a way to simulate decision-making in complex environmental situations. So there's a lot of connections bursting. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so too. I kept thinking like, what will be the things we see if we play World Game now? Like, what would be it? What is the first thing we noticed, and would it lead us to do something? Yeah.
We also have a very interesting comment by Matthew Shapiro on the chat. Wonder if he wants to comment on it or talk about it a bit, or.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Social planetarium. Sorry, my video on this computer doesn't work. So, but so for many years, I've been researching and trying to promote the idea that Harold Lasswell developed in the 50s, 60s, 70s. He called it the social planetarium, which sounds like something every city really should have, but I don't know if any have been built permanently. There are certainly exhibits, but basically spaces where the public of all ages, could go and interact with exhibits and better understand the issues they're facing and the trajectory between the past, present, and future of their community, and choices and scenarios and things like that. So it sounds like a lot of when I saw this presentation come up, it triggered in my mind that concept. I think I went to ESI in New York in 2000 or so, and because I was looking for firms like Schlossberg's firm, who are experts in designing interactive spaces, to get behind this concept and maybe promote it nationally, globally. So I'm still actually working on it today, but yeah, so that's I just saw some connections between the thought process that was being put into this museum and the social planetarium idea.
Yeah. It's the project is really fertile in that sense. It makes you think more things by looking at it. I certainly experienced that as well.
So do we have any more questions? We are at the time point, I guess. But we are open to any more questions or comment, or perhaps one. There is one. Okay. So if not, Merve's talk will be available, as I understand, and Matthias has already posted that, will be available on the ASC channel. I think very soon. You could play it again, listen to it. Yes, and it was a wonderful, I think, presentation. Thank you so much, Merve.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dulmini, for having this conversation with me and for this invitation. I'm very happy that this got off.